Hi everyone, it's Danny. Alright, so today we're going to discuss about Oncidium orchids, Oncidium type orchids like intergenerics and so on, and their way of growth. And this is because my viewer Astrid has asked me to make a video in which I show the different stages of growth in Oncidium orchids. And I can totally understand that. If you started off with Phalaenopsis and then you go towards an Oncidium, you will notice it has a totally different way of growing, and it can be quite confusing. And it was for me as well at the beginning, but then I started to actually love the way of growth of an Oncidium orchid. Alrighty, so for the purposes of this video, I will refer to Oncidium orchids, intergenerics like Colmenaras, Brassias, Brassidiums, Ulcinaras, and so on. Everything is absolutely the same. Also, Miltonias and Miltoniopsis and Miltonia hybrids like Miltassias and so on, they all fall in the same category, and everything that I will say will apply to them as well. Let's get started. Okay, so let's start with the moment that you actually purchase a beautiful Oncidium orchid. Most probably you will find it in bloom. That's why you purchased it, because you liked the blooms. So the orchid will have one or more flower spikes, it will be in bloom, and the orchid will most probably look something like this. As you can see here, my orchid has a few pseudobulbs, this one being the latest pseudobulb which has produced the flower spike. So everything looks like this. Now at some point, as you can see, the flowers will start to fade and fall off, and shortly after, the flower spike will start to dry out until the base. At this point, you need to just cut the flower spike as close to the base as possible, just for aesthetic reasons, as the flower spike will actually not branch out. In most cases, it will not produce any secondary spikes, it will not continue to grow from the top, and so on. Again, in most cases, they are nothing like Phalaenopsis when it comes to blooming and sequential blooming and so on. So we cut the flower spike. Okay, but now what? Because the orchid looks like this, the old pseudobulb will actually not produce any more flower spikes, so what will happen next? Well, the next thing that will happen after the flower spike is spent and is dried and the orchid is not in bloom anymore, you will notice usually from the last bulb, the one that had the flower spike, just outside the bulb, from between the last leaf and the actual plant, the actual bulb, you will notice a new growth. We will call it growth, but this is actually the beginning of a new pseudobulb. And at the beginning, it will start very small, in some cases very thin and very, just flimsy-like, depending on the variety of orchid that you have. So this will appear and will start to grow slowly. After a while, the flimsy little thing that appeared next to the pseudobulb will transform into this cluster of leaves at this point. Now, how fast it will grow, this will depend on the orchid itself, on its genetics, but it can also depend on external factors such as light, temperature, and so on. It can also depend on the state of health of the orchid. So usually in about 6 to 9 months, even maybe a year, this growth will continue to produce leaves like this and will still grow in height. Not necessarily in width, but in height definitely. So at this point, it doesn't really look anything like its mother bulb, does it? It's just a cluster of leaves, but this is quite normal. Okay, let's see the next stage. After a while, this growth will start to look more and more like its parent. It still does not have a pseudobulb. It still looks pretty thin, and it's still a cluster of leaves. But what it does is, it is producing a new root system. This is actually the next future main root system of this orchid. So the new growth will put out the leaves and also the new roots as well. But it still does not look like its mother bulb yet. Okay, let's see the next stage. After a little while, this growth will actually start to appear like its mother bulb. It will start to form this pseudobulb, as you can see, from between the leaves, and this pseudobulb will grow thicker and thicker until it will reach, in most cases, to the size of the mother bulb. So in some cases, the orchid will start to produce a flower spike at this point, even though the pseudobulb is not completely matured. But most other orchids will actually wait until the pseudobulb is mature to produce a flower spike. Now there are those cases in which the orchid does not bloom from the newest pseudobulb it just created. Now, this can be due to a multitude of things like external factors, not enough light, inappropriate temperature, not enough fertilizer, and so on. It can also be due to the fact that the orchid might have been sick and it just wants to regain her strength more before it puts out flowers. There are various reasons. Also, an orchid can stale blooming quite a lot if it doesn't feel it's the right season or the right environment or whatever the orchid thinks. If the new pseudobulb created does not produce a flower spike just yet, don't worry, it's not necessarily a reason for worry. It can produce it after a few months, or it might not produce it. It can just start to grow another shoot again, but that new shoot might actually bloom. So it's a bit of a lottery, but what you can do is offer the proper environment for your Oncidium orchid. Good light, good fertilizer, enough moisture, and so on. This will actually increase your chances of having beautiful blooms once those pseudobulbs mature. In the end, the flower spike will produce buds, and the buds will open into beautiful and gorgeous blooms. Now, at this point, the pseudobulb is already mature, and it will actually look like the mother bulb. And actually, after the flower spike dries off and all the flowers fall, everything will start all over again. Now, this is a cycle of growth of Oncidium orchids and all other Oncidium intergenerics or Brassias or Miltonias and so on. Now, this actually happens with Callia orchids as well, but this video was only dedicated to Oncidium orchids. So as you can see, it is a cycle of growth. When the new shoot matures into a pseudobulb, the orchid flowers, it drops its flowers and starts to produce another new pseudobulb, and so on. Now, a few ideas here. The new shoots will only appear from the new pseudobulbs, or the last pseudobulbs created. Sometimes, in, let's say, rare cases, the old pseudobulbs can produce new shoots and new pseudobulbs as well. But for the main part, the old pseudobulbs are only kept for energy because they actually feed the new growth, the new shoot, flimsy tiny little shoot that you see. They feed it until that new shoot creates a root system of its own, which in its return feeds the old bulbs. So it's a really nice mechanism if you think about it, and this is what I love about Oncidium orchids. They do have such an interesting way of growth, and also they have such beautiful flowers, and I think they're actually easier to care for than Phalaenopsis orchids, let's say, because if you manage to lose one of the back bulbs, the old bulbs, it rots. You can simply remove it and the orchid is absolutely fine because it still has the new pseudobulbs which continue to grow, and so on. So for this reason, I really love Oncidium orchids and I find them fascinating, and I hope you found this useful. If you didn't know much about Oncidium orchids, I hope this helped you. And if you want to buy Oncidium orchids, I would suggest you go for it. They're wonderful plants and currently my favorite alliance, apart from some species, let's say. So okay, thank you for suggesting this video, Astrid. It was really nice. It was a good idea, and if you guys have any more suggestions or questions for me, just leave me a comment and I will try to make a video in which I will show you and explain stuff to you. And if you want to see more videos from me, don't forget to subscribe. Also, if you have a good orchid story or just something you want to share with us, or pictures with your orchids, please send them to me at myOrchidStory@gmail.com, and around Christmas time I will make some special videos, some special stories, because you know, it's the season. Alrighty, so again, thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye!